today will please God, who is our rock and our refuge. Attachment is defined as the, quote, deep and enduring connection established between a child and a caregiver in the first years of life. Attachment is defined as a deep and enduring connection established between the child and the caregiver in the early years of life. It is that link that we feel to our parents. It is that close tie, that unique and powerful bond that we feel for a parent. Attachment is that dear, sweet feeling of being united with somebody who loves us and accepts us for who we are. It is trusting that that person wants what's best for us and trusting them completely to ensure that we have everything that we need for life and for living. Attachment is the sum of all those deep feelings and commitment that we have for those we love most dearly. That is attachment. But could you imagine if you were unable to feel that? If you were unable to bond with others? Unable to experience that close, intimate connection? It would make for an awfully lonely and loveless existence. Did you know there are people who can't do that? There are people who can't feel that. People who emotionally are unable to attach with others, and psychologists call this attachment disorder. Attachment disorder. People with attachment disorder have trouble trusting others. As a result, they can never get too close to anybody, emotionally intimate with friends or family. They're always expecting and waiting for the relationship to end at any moment, and so they're always preparing for that process and going through the weaning process the moment that a relationship becomes intimate. You can imagine how this would wreak havoc on a marriage. People with attachment disorder have a poor sense of self-identity and a low sense of self-worth. They will often enter into abusive relationships and be self-destructive, including sabotaging their own success. Because attachment disorders develop early during early childhood, many people with attachment disorders are unable to remember their childhood very well. Or when they do remember parts of their childhood, they're emotionally detached from the memories. They may tell you about the death of a close loved one or a beloved pet, but be unable to connect emotionally with that memory. They may also suffer from sharp mood swings, depression, and hopelessness that leads to poor personal hygiene. In the most extreme cases of attachment disorder, people may also develop habits of lying or stealing, and people may even act out violently toward animals, toward other people, or even towards themselves. You may have even heard in the news recently about the Tennessee woman who sent the adopted child, the 7-year-old boy, back to Russia after 6 months. She took him and put him on a plane with a note and sent him back to Russia. On the note, it said that he was violent and psychopathic, and she felt that her family was in danger. How can that be with a 7-year-old boy? Now, I am not condoning this woman's actions by any means, but it had to be a severe, severe situation to drive a 26-year-old woman to be so afraid of a 7-year-old boy that she would feel that she needed to put him on a plane with a note and send him back to Russia. What is it that causes these attachment disorders? How is it that they develop? When a child gets to be around somewhere between 6 months and 18 months old, they begin to naturally develop an attachment to their primary caregiver, usually mom. But sometimes it's dad, or sometimes it's even a grandparent. It is a person who is consistently in their lives. Somebody who's caring for them. Somebody who's loving them. Somebody who's regularly holding them, picking them up, cuddling them, feeding them, changing their diaper. In other words, it's a person who is generally meeting their needs. If during this period where this attachment is being developed, that first relationship is disrupted in some way or perverted, or it's perverted by, say, neglect or abuse, or it's unhealthy in some other way, the child may have trouble developing this initial attachment. And this first attachment serves as a blueprint. It serves as a model for all future attachments. If that first attachment is messed up, then the rest that are based on that first attachment are usually messed up. It's like taking a photocopy. If you take a clean piece of paper and lay it on a photocopier, it'll come out pretty much the same. But now imagine that same piece of paper crumpled up into a ball, stepped on, dirty, sullied, with a footprint on it. And you take and you straighten it back out and you put it on the photocopier. What's going to come out? A clean copy? No. You're going to see wrinkles. You're going to see blemishes. You're going to see dirt and smudges. And then each successive photocopy will reflect all of that same material, that mud, that dirt, that crumpling, the marks on the paper. The same way with attachments. Each successive copy will reflect the blemishes of the first. Imagine if a child who is in the process of forming this attachment to the mother, suddenly she is killed in a car accident. And the next closest person, father, is thrown into a fit of despair. And so the child is handed to the grandparents, who shuffle the child back and forth between homes for a time until the father is able to take care of the child again. But when he does, he's still in this depression and unable to emotionally reach out to the child, who reminds him of his lost mother, his wife. And so what this child experiences in this formative stage is the loss of one parent, the turning of the back of the other parent, the shuffling back and forth between the grandparents. This child may become confused about how to attach and what a healthy attachment feels like and looks like. They'll lay the foundation for all the future relationships. Think about that child. What will they expect in these future relationships? They'll expect people to suddenly leave and not come back, like mom. Or they will expect people to suddenly, without explanation, turn cold and unloving, like dad. Or maybe they will expect people to be here and there, partially committed, but feels like they're never there. Their presence is inconsistent, like grandparents. This child is the perfect candidate to develop an attachment disorder. Children who have been institutionalized in orphanages, who've lost their parents, been adopted, or passed around in foster care are prime candidates for attachment disorder. But there are also children and adults who have not experienced these things and who have suffered from and developed an attachment disorder. They don't fit any of these categories, but they still struggle with this attachment. Is the situation hopeless? How can a person with an attachment disorder overcome their natural inclination toward distrust, towards separation, towards an inability to bond with people? How can they overcome this and develop deep and meaningful relationships? Are there cures? There are many and various types of therapy that psychologists have tried to deal with and help people deal with these attachment disorders. Some of them are more extreme than others, and some are even controversial. Many of them involve an attempt to cause a reformation of an attachment of the same sort that they would have had. It's an attempt to enable the child or the person to form an attachment so that they can base all their new models for attachment on that one successful attachment. There was a daughter, a small girl, and she was unable to hold her father's hand. Now, I don't know exactly what happened in this girl's life, but it could have been something like a man had abused her, had used his hands to hurt her in some way. And so she saw the man's hand, any man's hands, as a tool for pain or torture. And so when her father reached out to her with his hands, she saw it as if he was reaching out with daggers. And so she was unable to touch his hands or be close to him, and all he wanted to do was hold his daughter. The therapists worked with this family, with this father and daughter, and what they did was they gave the man M&Ms, and he kept a bag of M&Ms in his pocket at all times, and anytime the daughter wanted an M&M, she could have one, but she had to take it from the father's hand. He would put the M&M in his hand, and she would reach out and take it. And again, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat, and again, and again. And every time she took that M&M, she would eat it and receive positive reinforcement that the hands that father held out to her were not something to be afraid of, were not something to hurt. And after a while, she became comfortable taking the M&Ms and not afraid. So the therapists developed games with the father and the daughter where their hands would have to touch for short times. And they practiced this over time. And the games got consistently longer, where their hands had to be in contact for longer and longer periods of time, until eventually the daughter could hold her father's hand. Not only could she see touching her father's hand as something that she could endure, but something that she could enjoy. And so she was able to bond more closely with her father, and now they could walk down the street hand in hand and joyfully holding each other's hands. There was a case I heard about on the radio where a boy had been adopted and had suffered from an attachment disorder, a severe attachment disorder. And the mother and the father were working with him, trying to help him overcome this attachment disorder, trying to help him to bond with them, but he was pushing them away and pushing them away. The mother took consolation in the fact that this boy had a friend who was adopted. And his friend was doing much better than he was. She was very glad that he had somebody who would mentor. She was hoping that this other boy, this older teenager, would mentor her son into how is it that an adoptive son can develop a close bond with his parents. She was hoping this until the day she came home and found out that this other boy had killed his parents and killed himself. When she realized that this boy, who was doing better than her son, had just done that, they were in serious trouble and needed serious help. And so she turned to one of the extreme cases of attachment disorder therapy, in which she and her son, for a period of about 6 months, could be no more than 3 feet from each other at any time. For 6 months. They were in each other's presence. And what the therapist was doing was reconstructing that early period, that early stage, where the child develops that trust, where the child is always within arm's reach of the caregiver, the mother, the father. And so night and day they were together. Each evening they had a certain amount of time, half an hour, an hour, where the son would have to lay across the parents' laps. And they would have to talk about things and make eye contact. A lot of times children with attachment disorders will avoid eye contact to kind of gain control of the situation. They would have to look at each other and talk. They wouldn't acknowledge him unless he would make eye contact. They wouldn't answer his questions or do what he wanted. They had to rely on him to feed him. And they would stroke his head and cuddle him and train him to be in close contact. And after months of this, night and day contact, he became like a baby again. And learned that not only did his parents love him, learned that they weren't going to abandon him, learned that they weren't going to turn their backs on him and give him up, learned that this was a permanent bond, a bond that he could trust, that his needs were being met, that it was a good thing, that he enjoyed. Once he learned that, then he was able to love them and be their son without fear and trust them. He developed an attachment, and now he can base his future relationships on that attachment. I got to hear part of his graduation speech as the valedictorian of his high school. And he broke down as he expressed his gratitude to his parents' commitment to him, their willingness to go through this difficult period, his willingness to sacrifice, to develop this bond, and allow him to love them. It took extreme therapy for this young man to work it out. But they worked through it, and now they are attached. Children who are adopted, those who are in the foster care system, are prone to struggling with attachment disorder, but they are by no means the only people